And so, writing the book for me was a beautiful thing that has come out of it is I don't have a history of substance use or addiction. And so I was not writing it for that audience. I was writing it really for people like me who didn't feel, I didn't have any sort of knowledge growing up of this. It just, I wanted to help people who might think this kind of feels, maybe I know someone who struggled with addiction, but I'm not a policy expert or anything like that. I just wanted to help them to understand a little bit of what's happening with addiction and why people are using drugs, and then how this criminalization has caused harm. But I didn't actually realize, and I've had a number of people tell me that it was actually really helpful to them in their own journey of understanding what role addiction had played for them and why was it that they took that path when they could see before their eyes that it was so destructive in their life, and yet they could not break that cycle of compulsive behavior. And so that has just been really meaningful to me, that it has impacted and touched people really across the experience spectrum.
Welcome to this week's episode of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features Christina Dent, founder of End It for Good, an organization focused on life-saving approaches to drugs and addiction that also reduce crime and empower families. Christina is a conservative Christian foster mom who supported a criminal justice approach to drugs and addiction until she saw the negative effects up close. Christina last appeared on People Are the Answer on episode 4 in October of 2021. I highly recommend checking that out for some additional background information, whether before or after checking out this episode. Christina and I discuss her incredible book, Curious, a foster mom's discovery of an unexpected solution to drugs and addiction, as well as how End It for Good has evolved since our last conversation, the staircase to recovery and growing support for different types of recovery journeys, and much more. Here is Christina Dent on People Are the Answer. Christina, thanks so much for joining me again on People Are the Answer.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm really excited to be back.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you back. Your first episode was the fourth episode of the show, which was October of 2021. So I believe this episode's in the 90s. I don't know exactly when we're publishing it, but mid 90s. So pretty cool to have you back, and hopefully the show's gotten a little bit better than then. I've gotten a little bit smoother.
It's awesome. You're getting close to that 100 show mark. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely on the radar right now. So hoping to dig back more deeply into People Are the Answer. I've been really focused on the movie that I've been working on, but it's always good to get back and grow it. And I'm excited to get to that triple digit mark.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, anyone listening, if you haven't listened to Christina's first episode, I highly suggest it. It's episode 4 of People Are the Answer, and you'll get plenty of great background story on Christina. And I'm curious, maybe despite that suggestion, can you tell people about your organization, End It for Good, and what you guys do?
Yeah, so End It for Good is a nonprofit. We are just about to pass our 5-year anniversary as a nonprofit, which is also kind of hard to believe. It's already been 5 years. But we work on inviting people to consider approaches to drugs and addiction that reduce harm, help more people stay alive, help them find and live thriving lives. And we see that as a shift away from a criminal justice approach to drugs and addiction, both the consumer side as well as the market side, and a shift towards a health-centered approach to substance use and legally regulated markets instead of this underground free-for-all of markets, which is driving so much crime and overdose and lots of harm related to those things. So a lot of our work is educational, inviting people to consider the root causes of the problems that they're seeing instead of just kind of responding to what they're seeing as the problem, and actually look at what's creating that problem. And that was a big part of my own learning journey, was realizing how much cause and effect I had misunderstood. And inviting other people to come on that learning journey. And we're not going to all end at the same place with all the same solutions, and that's okay. But we should be supporting the solutions we support based on an understanding of what's causing the problems we're trying to solve. And that often is not happening. And so a big part of our work is just helping people understand the problems that we're actually trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And just the educational aspect of your work is so important for, deeply changing hearts and minds instead of just trying to get someone to agree to a specific policy. Which I really appreciate. And, you kind of took people on that learning journey with you. So we'll get into your book, Curious, in a moment. But, you mentioned that you're 5 years in to End It for Good. When we last recorded, it was 2021. So, it's been another 3 years or so. How has End It for Good changed or evolved over that time?
So in the beginning, I never thought that legislators would want to have anything to do with us, because we're working on kind of tip of the spear things. We're inviting people to consider legally regulated markets for popular drugs. And that sounds like a pretty scary thing to a lot of people. And so in my mind, I thought the only role we can play is just to be out in the public, helping to shift culture, helping to give people information that might influence the way that they think. They might change their minds. It might influence their hearts. And that was always the goal. And I've always seen the solutions as partially a cultural shift, things we can do in our own families, our own communities, and also a policy shift, because a lot of these harms are directly linked to policies and laws that are creating these harms. So I always saw the ultimate goal as this policy shift, but just thought, I don't think we're ever going to be able to have a really direct role to play in that, because we're just going to be too far out for the incremental change that's going to need to happen. And what we found instead is that, so I'm based in Mississippi, and our work kind of began in Mississippi, is now growing outside of that. But what we found is, even in Mississippi, one of the most conservative religious states in the country, we have built great relationships with conservative legislators, people on both sides of the aisle, but with conservatives as well. And we have had numerous legislators reach out to us and say, hey, with a fentanyl problem, what are some solutions that could help with that? Hey, what do you think about this and that? Just for their own education, trying to understand how can we actually solve the problems. So it really has been this beautiful thing, because they will even say, I don't agree with you on everything. Well, I definitely don't agree on X, Y, or Z that you guys work on, but that's okay. I can work on work with you on some things, and I don't have to agree on everything. And so, we had a Republican state representative offer the opening comments at an event that we led in his own community. And he could have seen that as, I don't know if I really want to be associated with this, maybe quietly I know them and talk with them, and I don't want the people to, my community to actually know that. And he didn't. And even after that night, he came up to me and he said, I don't agree with you on everything, but hey, that's okay. There's a lot of good stuff we can work on together. And I love that. So that has been just over even the last 2 years or so, just a part that we are beginning to work on and figuring out, what does that look like for us? Does it mean expanding into more direct legislative work, adding on a C4 or something like that in the future, so that we can be more directly involved in that? If we can play a helpful role, and it seems like there is a role to play, particularly with our commitment to respectful dialogue, to non-confrontational, non-combative kind of work. We really are trying to bring people together and find common ground. And we are convinced that this is a very bipartisan issue, and everybody gets more of the world they want if we actually handle drugs and addiction in a way that is solving problems rather than just perpetuating things we've done for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and it's certainly not surprising to hear your message resonating with people in legislature, and them willing to stand behind you, because the story that you guys tell is one of human compassion, and it's one of health, healthcare, and taking away the criminal aspect of it that just causes so many more problems than we need. And so I can certainly appreciate that, and I think you guys can have a pivotal role in terms of educating legislators because they are able to listen to you and your team.
Yeah, it's been really fun to see that grow, and to see the expansion of not just being able to go and do things in a community, but really gaining the trust and the respect of people from all walks of life and from all different thought processes about how we solve these problems, and yet we're able to work on the things where we find common ground. I think that's so much of what we've lost in America that is very sad to me, and we need to regain, is this ability to find commonality and work together.
Absolutely. And I think your book does an incredible job of that, showing us how we can find commonality. I have Curious right here. Big fan, really, really enjoyed it. So powerful to, like, you were talking about your learning journey earlier, to kind of understand how you went through that journey. I think it adds a lot of context to your organization, one, but also it just gives people that also maybe had no experience with drugs and just thought they were wrong, like somewhere to start. And I think it's just a really powerful tool. So, I want to thank you for it, and just to hear about the journey of writing it.
Yeah. I was actually, just a couple hours ago, I was leading a book discussion on it at a local jail here. I know a woman who teaches a class there, and she said, "Hey, I don't know if you have time for this, but I've been talking about your book with this class that I teach there, on just how we think, how we interact with people, just life skills teaching." And so she's got about 20 women at this correctional facility. And she said, I've been talking about your book, and I've put some copies of the book in like the library there. And is there any chance that you would come and lead a discussion on this? So I got to do that this morning, which I absolutely love. It is so meaningful to me to be able to be in a room with people who are living out the harms of what we have done in approaching substance use and addiction. For many of them, that is the reason why they are incarcerated. And so, writing the book for me was a beautiful thing that has come out of it. Is I don't have a history of substance use or addiction. And so I was not writing it for that audience. I was writing it really for people like me who didn't feel, I didn't have any sort of knowledge growing up of this. It just, I wanted to help people who might think, this kind of feels, maybe I know someone who struggled with addiction, but I'm not a policy expert or anything like that. I just wanted to help them to understand a little bit of what's happening with addiction and why people are using drugs, and then how this criminalization has caused harm. But I didn't actually realize, and I've had a number of people tell me, that it was actually really helpful to them in their own journey of understanding what role addiction had played for them, and why was it that they took that path when they could see before their eyes that it was so destructive in their life, and yet they could not break that cycle of compulsive behavior. And so that has just been really meaningful to me, that it has impacted and touched people really across the experience spectrum. So people who've been directly impacted, as well as people really with no impact. I got a message from a woman about a week ago, and she said, I was reading through the book, and I realized all of this contempt that was in my own heart, all of this misunderstanding myself for what was actually going on when I see somebody who's struggling with an addiction, which is so much of my own story of realizing how much I had seen that behavior just through the lens of judgment, and not ever considered that there was something deeper going on there. I just saw it as this, kind of moral failing of this is a bad person. And so that has been really gratifying. It was a really hard book to write. It took me about 4 years working off and on it. I thought during COVID, I'll just knock out a book real quick, like I'm at home for a few months. I'll just write this thing. Did not work that way. It was a very emotionally draining experience trying to put myself back into the memories and the experiences and write. So much of the book is written in first person. It's as though you're living that with me. And I'm really proud of how it turned out, but it was challenging to write in that way.
I can imagine it is really powerful to hear how it's kind of helping people at all ranges of experience. Um, from your book and from my other work in like drug policy and criminal justice reform, I certainly have started to think differently about addiction and people that are in the system over the years. But it really does underscore what, a human situation it is, how much people are affected by circumstance. And I think it's wonderful to hear that there's people who have been affected that are now, reading the book and seeing, this, even though I was putting myself into destructive behavior, it wasn't necessarily all my fault. So
Yeah, and even for family members, I had a father who his son has struggled with addiction for, I think he said like 40 years. So the father is elderly. The son is, probably in his late 50s. Has been in and out of the criminal justice system, is in and there right now on a possession charge. And the dad came to one of my book signings and he said, I read the book and it just got me thinking about my son's life experiences. He said, I'd never really thought about what you talk about in there, about that what happens to us echoes into the future of our lives. So what we experience earlier on ends up, it impacts how we live, how we think, how we view the world, how we view ourselves. And he said, I never really thought about that with my son, but I started thinking back to his childhood. And then the dad started telling me some of the things he knew of that his son had experienced, incredibly traumatic things. He said, this has made me, curious about, I wonder if this played some role for him and why it has been so hard for him to overcome his addiction and to live long-term in sobriety. Yeah. And that was just, for me, that was such a beautiful interaction of being able to be part of someone gaining a different perspective on their loved one's struggle, of gaining, I just always think the more we can put ourselves in the position of, I'm going to assume I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. And I'm going to start just being curious about what is maybe happening in this situation. And, we don't like that. Americans don't like to say maybe this is just a universal thing. I know it's true here. We don't like to be not knowing. We don't like to admit that we don't know everything. We don't like to have anything that's in a gray area. We like everything to be very clear cut and dried. There's right and wrong. It's black and white, and we move on. And addiction is just not that way. It is not that way. And so the more we can take a step back and become curious about what's going on in this particular person's life, not in the life of the person I saw on the Hallmark movie, but the person I actually know in front of me, because every life is different. Every experience is different. The reasons for people's addictions are as different as there are people in the world. And we need to focus on how to help the individual person take that next step towards a life that they can be finding healing in and being fully present for, instead of just trying to overlay something we heard somewhere to say, hey, this worked for one person, it should work for everyone. That's not true. It's not life.
Well, you're certainly opening up different, mindsets and pathways for people and families with your book. So, thank you for that. And, you mentioned that it was hard to get back in and kind of, especially writing from the first person, from some of these memories. I mean, I definitely had the thought reading it like, wow, you have a great memory. Is that something you're known for? Because I mean, some of your descriptions of your times at Load and Place and stuff like that, like for me, going back to childhood is like, I have like little images here and there, but I don't have a lot of like specific experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Load and Place that you're mentioning, my childhood home. So I have an unfair advantage in that I have journals from all through my own childhood, and my mom kept journals all through her adult life. And I have lots of pictures, and the house, was under 800 square feet. So there's not a whole lot of area to be sort of documented. So some of that was going back to those journals, finding, for the story of the robbery that I tell in one of the first stories, one of the first chapters when I was 9, when our neighbors were held up. I remember I have very vivid memories of that. But I went back in my mom's journal and found where she documents that.
Wow.
Which is where I got some of those other details from, because she was an incredible storyteller, and she would write her journals like a story,
Wow.
because she loved to go back and read them later. And so it was her way of kind of capturing the storytelling. So I had some added help in that.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, what a beautiful thing to have, like a kind of vision into your mother's mind.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting too. She would say all during my growing up, she would say, the human mind is a slippery thing, because she would often, we'd be having some debate about something that happened a year or two in the past. And we would all be certain we remembered it exactly as it happened. And she would go back, and sometimes it would be her. She would say, I know we didn't do that. And she would go pull out her journal and look back, and she would say, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. How could I remember something that's so
Yeah.
different from what is, what actually happened? And so I saw that, even, I think probably because of the journals, am even more aware of how slippery our minds can be, because even going back and reading things, you're like, oh, I remembered it this way, but I do remember now. Yeah, those people
Yeah.
did move out before that happened, and we, um, our memories are not always trustworthy. But
Yeah, that's
when you get
true.
something that's written down at the time, it helps to correct some of those things.
Well, it seems that she definitely passed down her consistency and persistence. I mean, that takes serious discipline to do that on a consistent basis. So the fact that you both did goes a really long way, and it certainly adds a lot of depth in the book to how deep and personal so many of these instances are. And even when they're other people's stories, still you take them from a very human angle, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I really wanted to honor the stories of the people that I told, not just my own, but particularly for people whose stories I was telling. So everyone in the book whose story is in there got a copy of their story as written for the book to approve. And my publisher said, do not do that. Do not send them. You're opening a can of worms for people. If they gave you the interview and everything you're saying is true, just run with it. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want people to, these are people's lives. These are in many cases very personal things to them.
Yeah.
And I want it to be something that they are happy they participated in, that they feel good about, and not something where they feel like, oh gosh, that feels like it's kind of exploiting my story for entertainment or for, sensation or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
And I can appreciate that. I like to give podcast guests the opportunity to listen before it goes live for the same reasons. It's very personal stuff that we're talking about. But I've definitely have had people like your editor that are like, what are you doing? It's going to add so much, but it's worth it for the humans that are involved and that helped.
yep, absolutely.
I'll also say, in addition to reading through the book, I listened later on to the audiobook, and you did such a good job. Like, was that your first time doing audio recording? I mean, I know that you are an incredible public speaker, but I just was curious what that experience was like.
Yes, it was my first time. I had no idea when I signed up to do the audiobook what that was actually going to entail. In my mind, I thought, well, I don't know, it'll probably take me about 4 hours to read the book, reading at a speaking rate, and I'll just kind of show up and read the book. Not so. This is not how audiobook recording works. So it took me like about 8 weeks of preparation. Like every day I had homework to do. It was like a voice strengthening was part of it. So you could actually voice multiple hours of the book without your voice giving out on a given recording day. It was marking up the whole book on an iPad with like, when is this word going to be enunciated versus like, how do you read the sentence so it makes sense?
Wow.
There was so much to it that I had not realized. When you're listening to an audiobook, when you're reading in your mind, you're adding in inflection and you don't
Right.
even realize it. And sometimes you get to the end of a sentence and you're like, oh, I was thinking they were kind of saying it this way,
Yep.
but not. Sometimes there's a sentence that you say with a happy voice, and sometimes you're trying to like build to something really meaningful, And if you don't have that marked ahead of time, you don't know how to build,
Right.
how to read the sentence, or you end up in a situation where you're like, oh shoot, I'm saying something really kind of sad and my voice is way too peppy for that. So
Wow.
to decrease the amount of time that you have to reread everything as you're going along, there was a whole marking up process for all of the chapters of the book of where do the inflection points come in, where do there need to be pauses between, ideas, or pauses for impact. It was a whole thing, but it was really fun, and I was really glad that I was able to do it. It was, I wanted it to be in my voice, because so much of it is just first person telling of my story. And I'm glad I put the work in to do it. But it was, as with most things in life, way more work than you think it's going to be when you say, yeah, I'll work on this.
Well, all the work that you put into it certainly comes through in the performance. And yeah, I mean, it's not something that I've done, recorded book recording. So I wasn't aware of all that goes into it. And it makes sense, that you have to decide like how you're going to enunciate and things like that. But, and I could tell there was thoughtfulness in how you did it, but still just to know all of that extra time and effort that went in, it was worth it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And, I think the book, it's vulnerable of you in a good way to share the stories that you do and to come, from your childhood. And, it just really made a mark on me, like what a humble upbringing you had, how humble your parents were, and some of the things that you had to deal with, like the train crash and obviously your parents' eventual passing. I mean, you've really been on a roller coaster of sorts. And I think that the depth of the story in the book, like you don't come into this book knowing that you're going to get maybe a kind of an origin story of your path. You look at it as this is a journey of curiosity around drugs, but really it's also a story of your perseverance and all that you've been through, and the salt of the earth family that you grew up in.
Yeah, I really had a unique childhood, I think. Wonderful parents. They were, they had their faults too, but they were wonderful. And that experience, I think I wanted to include it in the book because I wanted people to get a sense of how deeply held my previous perceptions were of how I thought about drugs and addiction, how much it made sense to me to support this tough criminal justice approach and let's lock people up and these are just bad people. And a lot of that came from just the culture that I grew up in, and a conservative Christian culture in the 90s, where it was, I mean, in the 90s, kind of everyone was tough on crime, but particularly in that culture. And so I wanted to include that because I wanted for people to be able to, as I was taking the learning journey and changing my mind, really understand the mindset that I was coming from. And then there's just, unique things about the way my parents chose to raise us that were at the time, things I maybe didn't always like, because, what kid wants to be different? You just want to fit in and, have whatever the cool thing is like everybody else. And that was not on their radar. They were not interested in fitting in or being, quote unquote cool. So it really was an experience that I actually think there is a significant part of that discomfort that I felt growing up that was part of, and so this is to my parents' credit, not to my own at all, that was part of why I, even though I was terrified of kind of talking about this change of mind publicly, wanted to do that because I, for better or worse, I felt like growing up, what I realized is it just doesn't kill you to be different. You can be different and everybody can think your family's a little crazy, and it doesn't kill you. And actually, I saw a lot of people who respected my parents for their decisions. They weren't making the same decisions, but they respected that my parents wanted to live in this, 800 square foot house that was 2 bedrooms and 1 bath with 6 people in the family. and they wanted to homeschool their kids, and they wanted to, for my mom to stay home, and my dad's working at a Christian school and they're making, nothing. So I think those experiences, they helped me to see that it's okay to step outside of the norm and do something that isn't sort of mainstream. Um, and that there could be something really beautiful that could come out of that just because, one of my family's kind of core things is like, if there's a line of people, you probably don't need to be in it. Like all those people probably got in the line because they saw somebody else in the line. And there's actually probably two lines, and there's somebody, there's a whole line that nobody's in that you could walk straight up to the ticket counter or whatever it is. Like the mindset was, don't just get in a line because other people are in it. Don't just continue down a thought process just because everyone else thinks that way. Don't just keep doing something because we've always done something. And I think that was a really powerful lesson that I did not appreciate as a child, but that is very much the legacy that I think led me into this work, was seeing that your conviction is valuable, and even if it is at odds with what is conventional, that you should follow your convictions. And I certainly haven't done that perfectly at all, but I've gotten to see what they saw, which is when you believe that you need to follow a path and you follow that path, then you can unlock doors and see things happening that are really amazing and inspiring. And I've gotten to meet so many people who have changed me, who have changed who I am, how I see the world, and helped me to become, in my mind, sort of more fully human, really not see only such a narrow path and such a narrow way of being, but to really open that up and to see people as valuable no matter what their external life looks like and the decisions that they're making, but see internally to who they really are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that your parents' lessons stuck with you. It would have been so easy for them to sort of bend to societal will and not stick to their convictions. But it's incredible that they did. Certainly had tremendous impact on you and your siblings. And, we've mentioned kind of you digging into your story and the vulnerability that comes with that. What has it been like for you, since the book has come out? I know we've talked about a couple of responses so far, but, personally, what's that been like?
It's been a really positive experience. I was in my therapist's office a few weeks after the book came out, and she said, "What does it feel like? Do you just feel this vulnerability hangover? Like, do you want to go crawl under a rock?" And I said, "No, I actually have this feeling of understanding. Like, so often when I'm talking about these issues, which are really complex issues, and I'm trying to walk this sort of middle path of not everything's not kind of tied up in a bow. And so often when I am talking about it, whether it's somebody, at an event that says, "Hey, what do you do?" And I have, 20 seconds to try to explain the work that I do. And it just doesn't translate well in 20 seconds. So having the book out there to me felt like this ability to be understood, for people to really see the arc of why I care about the work, and get their hearts and minds around the ideas that we are trying to spread as an organization. The book is my story, but the book is one of the outworkings of the organization. This is the heart. These are the ideas behind what we're doing. We just often do it through storytelling. We often are communicating through telling our own stories or other people's stories. And so for me, it has just been a very positive experience of being able to put all of that together in one place, and then having people read that and go, "Oh, now I kind of see this full picture that you can't get in a Facebook post or a 20-minute speaking engagement somewhere." You can help people rethink something. You can help them to see that there's more there than they knew before. You can communicate some things, But the book gave an opportunity for this much bigger picture understanding for people to really get their minds around what we're talking about, because it is a pretty massive shift from the way that we have approached drugs and addiction for our whole lifetimes.
And for some of the people that are mentioned in the book, have you been in touch with them to see how or if it's affected their lives? Especially interested in Joanne's response, given how, paramount that your experience with her is to your story.
Yeah. So Joanne is just such an incredible, brave, courageous woman. And in the book, her story is always part of what I'm talking about, because she's the person who changed my heart and led me on the learning journey that eventually changed my mind as I read research. But she was the mother of one of our foster sons, and he's been back with her since he was a tiny baby. He was only with us for a very brief time. But I have over and over again asked her, are you sure it's still okay for me to talk about your part of this story? Like, this is your life too. And I don't want to be putting it out there if you don't want that. And over again, for 7 years now, she has said, yes, you can. I want you to tell the story. I want people to know what's possible. And for her, that is helping people to see that you can use drugs for years and years, like she did for about 20 years by the time her son was born. And she has been living in long-term sobriety now since then. So there's no one who is past hope. There is no one who can't experience healing in their life. For some people, that might not look the way that their family or their society wants it to look, but can we allow people to try to find as much healing as they can? So she has continued to just be amazing. She is now she started a nonprofit to help other women who are in similar situations as she was, trying to get their lives back on track after going to drug treatment. She is parenting her son, who is amazing. He was our foster son. He is this little drummer. He learned how to play the drums when he was really young. And he's 9 now. And he'll play with blues bands in their town at music festivals. They live up in the Mississippi Delta, which there's lots of music history and music celebration there. And he has just gotten to be this amazing little drummer. He actually played at our conference that we hosted in November in Jackson. She came and shared her story, and he played with the band at this post-conference, hors d'oeuvre that we had for all the attendees. It was just so fun to see them doing so well. And for her, I've had this opportunity to tell the story in my own words over and over and over again for the last 5 years. And for her to have that opportunity to tell her story in her own words. And we did a subsequent podcast episode with her on our podcast, and have connected her with other places, other people that have wanted to do interviews with her, to give her a chance to be able to share in her own words. But she really, her courage to let such a vulnerable part of her life and such a low part of her life, losing custody of your child, to be told so publicly is just so touching to me. And I hope that as people hear the story, as they read the book, as whatever they interact with related to my part of the story of End It for Good, that they're always seeing her as the hero of the story. It is not me. She is the one who has gotten up for 9 years and made the decision to stay sober, to keep building a life for her and her son that is healthy and thriving. And she should be celebrated every day of her life for that. She's really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tremendous to hear their story and how things have been going. And, hopefully they are an inspiration to many others out there. And, I just wrote down a handful of notes when I was reading. So it's been a minute since I wrote them down, but just things that like really stuck out to me. And one was when you were sitting in the hearings and seeing how quick the sentences came down. and you saw a family shattered before, well, the mother was still pregnant with their baby. Like it was such like a impactful way to look at it, like mentally. I think for a reader, is you're shattering these families before they've even had a chance. And I mean, can you just talk about the effect of seeing that kind of thing face to face, and what that does to you, and how that pushes you forward?
Yeah, and I'm not in courtrooms regularly. That's not a common experience for me. I'm generally out, speaking to the Rotary Club or something like that. It was such a unique experience to be there the day that I talk about in the book. Um, and I had in my mind this picture of Law and Order. I mean, if you've never been in a sentencing courtroom, all we have to go on is what we've seen on TV, which we know TV doesn't correctly depict anything else in our lives properly. And yet, when you only have that to go on, you just make an assumption, I guess, that that's kind of what it's like. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, if a person is getting sentenced, there's attorneys, there's a prosecuting attorney, there's a defense attorney, and they're making their cases. And in my mind, I had always just pictured a jury, because that's what you always see in courts, but that there's not a jury there in most cases where people are getting sentenced for things. The judge is just making the determination of what should happen. And so we got there in the morning, because a woman that I knew was going to be there that day. And we got there, and they tell you to come all at the same time, which I realized when we got there, all these other families and friends are there also to see this. I wonder why they didn't give us a specific time to be there, like when that case was going to be. But it quickly became apparent it's because the cases move so quickly that there's no way for them to know how quickly that case is going to be called, because it would be 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. That was a very long case, the one that I actually walk through the story of what happened in the book. And yet here you have people's lives that are being determined in 5 or 10 minutes. And often with defense attorneys who are public defenders, they're court appointed and they work for the state. There's lots of wonderful public defenders. They have so many cases. They cannot possibly prepare for every case, read all of the cases before they actually have to defend this person. They're just incredibly overworked, even if they are deeply caring for the clients that they work for. And it became so clear that I think the American public has no concept of what actually happens in a courtroom, of how quickly people's lives are being determined with very little context, very little evidence or back and forth or explanations or trying to understand who is this person. And even there was one point where some of the family of the woman that I was there to support had asked their attorney, can we explain to the judge the collateral damage that a prison sentence would have on the broader family and, the children and all of this. And the attorney said, no, do not do that. The judge does not care what kind of collateral damage. He will take that as trying to make excuses for whatever the person did, which was, it was just shocking to me. I could see, on the one hand, I could see how a judge would take it that way. Judge, I did this particular thing maybe, but if you send me to prison, this is what's going to happen. My kids are this is going to happen, that. Like, I can cognitively see how a judge would take that as making an excuse or trying to get a lighter sentence by saying, look, and yet society and that family do have to live with the collateral damage. It is real. It's not an excuse. It's a very real cost that we are all paying. And it was fascinating to me to see that is not being taken into consideration it's actively not being it's actively not even being presented because of the way that it can come across, or a way a particular judge might think it comes across. And so we have all of this collateral damage, whether it is law enforcement officers that they just arrest people and book them. They don't see what happens to them after that. They're just this one slice of that. Then you have the whole process of them being either held in jail or, getting out until their court hearing. Then you've got the judge. He sentences them and never sees them again. Then you've got the whole prison system. So each one of these parts of the system are all these little tiny pictures. And there are very few people, other than the family members and the people actually being sentenced, who understand the full scope of what actually happens and are actually living out the collateral consequences of prison. It's not to say we don't need prison. We do. There are times where people can't be in the community and the community be safe. But we've come to lean on incarceration to try to solve everything. I mean, we just, something's bad, somebody's doing something we don't like, and we say we should just make it illegal. And we don't think about, what does that actually do? What is the collateral damage going to be from that? And what is society going to have to pay for that collateral damage? Even if you have no compassion at all for the person or their family, we all pay. We all are impacted by whether it's employment opportunity that's gone, whether it is educational opportunity that's gone, whether it's children whose relationships with their family members are severed because they're separated for so long in prison. There's so many social harms that come, and we all live with the consequences of that. And we just have not stopped long enough to think about what were some of those upstream causes, and do we really want to continue using this system as a catch-all for everything we think we don't want people doing in the world? It's costing.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Yeah, absolutely. It's not a great Band-Aid, and it's a shame to see the lives that it can ruin, and that people making the sentences aren't necessarily taking that into account, and the societal cost. And I think that one thing you get across in your book is that we'll always have some problems with drugs, but we don't have to add the problems of prohibition. I think that's a great point, in that it's there's going to be drugs regardless. Do you want legal businesses selling them or the streets selling them? Especially given that the majority of drug users, or at least there are plenty of drug users that responsibly use certain drugs. So shouldn't they have the opportunity to access, regulated and tested versions?
Right. And it's a good point to expand that to this, the issue of prescriptions and the overprescribing that was happening by some doctors a number of years ago. Then the backlash to that of kind of cracking down on doctors prescribing. We don't want anybody having opioids now. We do allow people to get a prescription, but it's highly regulated. And the goal every year we hear being touted of fewer prescriptions. When I was in that jail this morning leading that discussion, several of the women said they just were kind of explaining their trajectory of drug use. And two of them specifically said, I started out on prescriptions, and then I couldn't get them from my doctor anymore. So I started buying them from other people, but they were still prescriptions. I was buying pills from other people who got them from a different doctor. And then the crackdowns happened even further. And then nobody could get pills at all that were actually from a legal regulated supply of some sort. There were just no prescription pills to be found. And so that was the beginning of injection heroin use for one of them, and for street drug use for the other one. So we look at that and say, wait a second. If the goal of this prescription crackdown on opioids was to help people be healthier, the the response for people who were already addicted is that their lives got incredibly less healthy. Now they're using contaminated drugs. They're having to engage in the underground market. It just is, one of the women said, as soon as I made that switch off of legal prescription drugs to just drugs that were contaminated on the street and they had all kinds of stuff in them, she said, my life just spiraled into, it was just, terrible. And she's now trying to regain that life again. So this shift from, it's important to acknowledge, yes, there can be misuse, misprescribing and misuse of legal drugs. But when we forcibly lock down legal access, people are just going to go to the underground market, and they're going to be far more likely to die, far more likely to be engaging in all sorts of risky behavior that's associated with this underground market. And that's not a win. This is not helping people to be healthier. And to your point, most people who are using substances are not addicted to them. So we want to be careful not to lump everyone into this category of, if they're using, they are addicted. All that ends up doing is sending people to drug treatment who do not need it, which takes away a bed from someone who does actually need it. And it puts people in drug treatment who don't want to be there with people who are actually trying to get sober. Getting sober is hard enough, even if you're surrounded by a whole bunch of other people that are deeply committed to the process. I can't imagine how hard it is when you're sitting next to people who are simply there because someone made them show up and they have no interest or desire to stop using drugs at that point in their life. It creates so many bad incentives when we try to just by force of law force people to make certain decisions, whether that's forcing them not to use or forcing them into treatment or forcing them. It does not do the thing we want it to do, which is actually help people.
And you talk about making saving lives the number one priority, which could, really relieve the system in some ways, get some stress relief for the system in terms of opening police up to more work, only punishing drug users when they actually cause harm and do other law breaking. And I think that, I wish that could be the pillar of all that we do in this is saving lives. And you were talking about people being forced into rehab. And I recall from the book, a story about a chef who was able to wean himself off of drugs. And there isn't a lot of support in our society for rehabbing yourself. And, there's some people like him it just wouldn't have fit in his life to go. And he felt like he could do it himself. And that's powerful. And, why don't we see more support for that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I haven't heard it put that way before of why don't we have more support for people trying to do it without going to treatment? And I had really never thought about the challenge of treatment. This is partially just because of the way that we tend to dehumanize people, and we sort of flatten out other people's lives and what they can or can't do. So we think, well, that people should just go to treatment, 30, 60, 90-day treatment, then go to sober living. Well, if you just removed me from my life for 30 or 60 or 90 days, whether it's in incarceration or in treatment, I'm not working. I'm not what's happening to my kids? Who's parenting them? How are they getting to school and all the places where they go? We have these sort of flippant answers for other people. We'll just go to treatment. When you think about how many parents are single parents who is going to take their children for 3 months? How are they going to, even if they could get maybe grant funding to go to treatment, because treatment can cost tens of thousands of dollars to go one time. So most people can't afford that. If they don't have insurance that's going to pay for that, even if you can find a way to pay for the treatment, or your insurance will pay for the treatment, just disappearing from your life for months at a time is not possible for most people. Like the chef in my book, he thought, I could go to treatment, but I'm going to lose my career if I do that. You can't just disappear from the world of cooking and come back and say, hey, I'm going to be, executive chef again. Well, somebody else has taken that role in the time that you've been gone. You got to work your way back into it again, if that's even an option. So I love the way you frame that of why isn't there more help for that? Because the reality, the statistics say that more people recover without treatment than recover with treatment. The vast majority of people who recover from addiction do not go to treatment. There is no treatment that we know of that works for even the majority of people who try it. So even the treatments that we're most familiar with, or the programs, maybe I should say, that we're most familiar with, like AA has about a 90% relapse rate, which means it has about a 10% success rate. I don't think we should call that, hey, this is the answer then for everyone. Right. It's clearly not the answer for everyone. It works for some people. It doesn't work for the majority of people. That's true for every treatment that we know of that's out there, is that it is just really hard for people to recover. Some things work better. Some people need medication. Some people don't do well on medication and they want to try abstinence. Some people go to faith-based recovery programs and they love that. Some people don't want that at all. And if that's the only option to them, they're going to think there's no other path for them out of addiction. So I would love to see this expansion of how can we help people where they are in their own life, even if they're not going to inpatient treatment or anything like that. How can we help them have pathways that they can begin to walk on their own or in their community or with online support groups, or who knows what the path might be, that will help them to overcome addictions, even if they're not doing this kind of traditional inpatient route that most people just can't do unless they are. You often hear about it when you have a parent who is putting their child through inpatient treatment. Well, it's different when you're 21 than it is when you're 43 and you're trying to, to manage having kids or having a job. And how are you going to provide for your family? Again, even if the treatment's paid for, most American families do not have 3 months of expenses that they can just, they're just sitting around here and I can just pay for my life for 3 months while you disappear from it. That's even assuming that you have somewhere that your children can go and be cared for and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's really needs to be looked at more of a process. You talk about in the book the staircase to recovery, and that backward steps need love. And so to me, this is representative of that it can be a process. It doesn't have to be dive deep into intense treatment.
Yeah, that's one of my I think one of my favorite concepts in the book, and one of the concepts that I hope, even if people disagree on all of the policy solutions, let's say they don't want to change anything. They want to keep arresting people for possession. They want to keep the markets illegal. If we could just have a shift in the way that we think about recovery and we think about the real goal. So when I think about recovery, typically in our culture, we think of recovery as abstinence, that recovery is you are not using drugs and you are, whatever it is, you're working and doing all the things. And because there has been such a focus on abstinence and on today is the day you start your abstinent life, we have ended up creating this scenario where we have, let's say, somebody on the bottom step of the staircase who's in maybe chaotic active addiction. And then we have the top of the staircase, which is this abstinent life. And we knock out all the steps in between. And we say, okay, when are you ready to make that jump? Is today the day that you're going to just make that Herculean leap from the bottom step all the way to the top step? And we know from human behavior that people don't change this way. Very few people can change any behavior, much less something as ingrained and difficult as an addiction, all at one time, overnight. The most successful behavior change is this kind of incremental approach to not trying to change everything in your life all at the same time. You're very unlikely to be successful at that. You think about, how many of us can't even change the time we get up in the morning. We think, if I just got up 30 minutes earlier, I would have time to work out, or I'd have time to do whatever. We know it's good for us. We know we need to do it. We know we would be happier if we had that extra time. And yet we can't even make a small change like that with any degree of regularity. We do it for a week or two, and then we're like hitting the snooze again. And yet with addiction, we have this cultural mindset that people need to change overnight. And that's the only real change that counts. And what I hope is that we can build all those steps back into the staircase, and we can say, okay, here's where you are right now. What change are you open to? What's one little step? Like, how could we just keep you alive? Even if you're going to keep using, will you use fentanyl testing strips to at least know if you're getting drugs that are contaminated by fentanyl? Can you make sure you're not using alone, so that if you overdose, there's somebody there to help you? Now, is the ultimate goal that person is living a thriving life? Yes. But the path to get there in a sustainable way for most people is not going to be the quantum leap. It's going to be small changes over time, which is very painful for the people around them who want and need that immediate change overnight.
Yeah.
But if we can help people to take whatever that next step is that they are willing to take, they're far more likely to actually get further up that staircase and maybe all the way to the top, which might not be abstinence. Some people need to be on medication for a whole host of reasons for the rest of their lives. There should be no shame at all in someone being on a medication related to addiction. If they're thriving, if they are able to show up in their life and to engage and to be present in their life, that's the goal. We need to shift away from this thought process that the one goal is that they're not using drugs. No, the whole reason we care if they're using drugs is because we want them to be living a thriving life. And that needs to become the focus, not how they get there or how they maintain that, but that we can help people find that.
Yeah, it's so powerful. We need to remove the stigma of supporting people on that staircase, if you will. I think the staircase metaphor is so powerful, but there really is a stigma to, oh, you're helping this person that's still using, and in reality, like that's just what it takes. And so I hope that I know that your book is helping to get that message out there. And I hope that there's a mindset change around how people recover and that it looks different for everyone.
Yep. Everybody's path into addiction is different, and everybody's path out of addiction is probably going to be different too. We need to respect the individuality of people, and that the pathways that work for one person don't necessarily work for another person. I was asking a nurse practitioner friend who treats people who struggle with addiction. I said, what is the so he does medication for addiction. I said, what's the medication that's like most successful? And he said, it's the one that the client wants to try. Because even if statistically a particular medication should help people more, if people are invested, if they've decided that they want to try a certain thing, it's just far more likely to be successful for them. So the more that we empower people, that we give people a voice in their own journey, in their own recovery journey, instead of trying to tell them exactly what they're going to do and when they're going to do it and how they're going to do it, they're far more likely to be successful.
Yeah, it's a really great perspective. And, one thing I wanted to ask about the book, like obviously your religion's played a huge part in your life. And, there's a lot of Christian elements in the book that transcend the fact that that might be their origin, such as, talking about mercy preceding transformation. I thought was really powerful, and it's interesting from all perspectives. So, one, I just wanted to talk about, your religion's impact on the book and your perspective, and then, what you say to non-Christians like myself that read the book and that are like, oh, I don't want to read a Christian book, but it's not that. So I'm curious how you respond.
Yeah. So I included a lot of my faith, my Christian faith in the book, because I wanted to provide for people that have a similar background to mine. I wanted them to be able to see themselves making a similar shift as I had made. And so I wanted to wrestle with the things that I had wrestled with coming from that culture and that perspective. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so it was right during that kind of moral majority time. The Christian evangelical Christianity and conservative politics were arm in arm, and so I had to do a lot of unwinding in my own mind, not unwinding of my faith, but unwinding of that. In my mind, I grew up with this idea that good Christians support a tough criminal justice approach to drugs. This is the right approach. This is the Christian approach. And so I wanted to help people walk through that who might have a similar background, because people like me tend to be the people who are most opposed to any kind of change to the way that we approach drugs and addiction, particularly related to our drug laws. And I wanted to help them to put those beliefs and values in context and to see how this shift is not a loss of their values or beliefs. I see it as a better expression of the values and beliefs that I had already. So I knew in doing that it would, there's many people that work in this space that are not people of faith at all, or people of different faiths. But I wanted to write it to from a particular vantage point, to a particular reader, because I couldn't find anything else out there that was written really to that audience. And so somebody told me when I was writing, they said, you need to write it. You need to have a particular person in mind that you're writing to. And the more that you can do that, the more other people who don't fit that demographic will be able to sort of read over your shoulder and appreciate it and get where it's coming from. If you can kind of keep honed in on that particular reader, they'll be able to take lots of things from it, even if they're not coming from a similar belief background or anything like that. So I decided that was what I felt like maybe was the most helpful approach, maybe the most helpful piece that the book could add to the conversation. There's other great books out there that are on drug policy, and I'm not a journalist or anything like that. So I felt like my contribution could be providing this sort of conservative Christian faith perspective on it, and be helpful to the movement in that way.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And we've talked before about how you and End It for Good can speak to that audience in a very specific way. They feel like it's more understanding, more relatable for them. And I think for those that are not of that faith, it's still, your devotion comes across, and they can imagine what type of person you are even before they really get to dig much deeper.
And I love what you said too about, so many of the values transcend. They're not only Christian values. It is, people can resonate with mercy and with a desire to care for other people, and a desire to have compassion for suffering. Maybe we didn't understand that there was suffering happening, and so we didn't have compassion before. But and so I think in many of those things, even if I'm talking about them from a particular worldview, there are many of those values. This actually reminded me of this. So when I did my TEDx talk on this, which was 5 years ago, so it was right before I actually founded the organization, I went around. I had built this slide presentation that's still part of what we use today with a friend of mine from college, who's just this brilliant idea producer in visual form for slides. And I went and gave that presentation just to practice for the TEDx conference at a couple of like local places. Like there was a therapist's office that said, hey, you can come and practice in front of all of our therapists. And there was a community group. And so I went and gave the presentation to the community group. And in the TEDx talk, there's a part at the very end where I say, you know, as I came back and put everything that I learned in the context of my faith, of my Christian faith, and you know, I could not support it anymore. I felt like it was against those values. And there was a picture of a cross on the slide at that point. And there was so I opened it for kind of, you know, feedback, critiques, anything like that afterwards. And there was a woman who said, you know, I am not a Christian, but I resonate with so much of that. And I just, you know, when I saw the cross, it sort of made me feel like I couldn't be part of it because I wasn't coming from that worldview, even though I respect that that's what you believe. So I ended up swapping out that slide for something else because I thought, you know, it's that happens to be my own impetus, my own, you know, thrust behind the work for me. But to your point, there are lots of people who care and lots of people who want to see similar changes happen that are coming from different perspectives. And we can work together and find so much common ground, not just across political parties or whatever it might be, but across different faith traditions or no faith at all. One of my favorite books on this topic is Chasing the Scream, written by Johann Hari, who at that time, and I assume today, is an atheist. So there is so much that we can learn together and work on together, no matter where we're coming from, because we can get to these kind of core values together and find solutions that resonate with people from across the spectrum, whatever spectrum that might be.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it's really powerful. I certainly suggest everyone read and listen to it. Is there, you know, a specific place people should go to get the book that is most beneficial to you or to the organization?
They can go get it on Amazon. It's called Curious, and they can get it there. We've also got a few copies for your listeners. So if you want to email us at curious@enditforgood.com, we've got 5 free copies we'll send out to the first 5 people that email us and let us know where you heard about it. And we'll get those in the mail to you. We also have audiobook copies, Kindle copies. So whatever is your flavor of book intake, we can provide that for you. So shoot us an email at curious@enditforgood.com, and all of those are also available on Amazon as well.
That's awesome. I mean, I love how open and sharing you are with the book, and how even within the text you tell people to you encourage them to host discussions over the book and to read it with groups. And I think it's really powerful. And I know you talk about in the book when you were reading Chasing the Scream with a book initially, or with a group at one point, early on in your discovery, and what that was like. So, you know, how has that been going? Have people been connecting and meeting around the book that have, you know, brought you into the mix? I know you mentioned the prison you attended recently.
Yeah, we've had a couple of different, last week I was in Louisiana with a church that was doing a discussion. It's a conservative church, but they do a book club every summer. They read 3 different books, one every month of kind of the summer months. And so their pastor, who I went to college with 20 years ago, he said that he decided to choose my book as one of the books that they read. Their community was deeply impacted by addiction and lots of other harms related to addiction. And so he felt like it would just be a great conversation piece for them, and maybe a helpful healing for some of them. And so I went down there to be part of their discussion evening for that, which was really wonderful and amazing. I love to be part of that. And then we just had a couple of other groups that did book discussions that we kind of provided. They let us know that they wanted to host a discussion, and we said, great, we'll come alongside you. We'll create graphics for you if you want to do some promotion on social media. We'll give you kind of a, you know, there's a discussion guide for the book that's on the website anybody can download, but you know, they wanted some kind of deeper questions and things like that. And some of them did it on a multi-part series. One of them did it just one evening gathered for a discussion with the group they had gathered. And some of them wanted to take it a little more slowly and gather a couple of different times. So just providing some kind of feedback for them, sounding board, hey, I tried this, they didn't really want to discuss this, but we discussed that. How would you handle that for the next time? So it was really fun to be able to walk with people. And we love doing that. So if you're interested in hosting a discussion of Curious, shoot us an email at curious@enditforgood.com. We would love to partner with you in that. We will send you free copies of the book for you to do that with. So for the people who want to participate in your discussion, we'll send you copies for all of those people free, because our goal is getting the word out. And when people host a book discussion, they are getting the word out to more people in their community. And that often can create a little nucleus of people who will then go and say, hey, what else can we do in our community related to this? Where else can we move this? Maybe we can go talk to our sheriff or police chief and see if they will deprioritize arresting people just for drug possession. Things like that. This is how the world changes, is just regular people taking it upon themselves to make a difference. And when enough people do that, the tidal wave of change comes.
Yeah, it truly does. And I love that this book is facilitating those conversations and, sparking change in communities. I think that its effects will continue to grow and continue to be felt for an incredibly long time. And, towards the end of my episodes, there's kind of a set of questions I tend to ask. I have just a couple of them I'm going to kind of re-ask you to see if there's new stories or see how things have changed. So, last time I asked you about a time when you really saw that your work could affect change, or, maybe had an epiphany moment. Has there been anything like that over the last 3 years that really stands out?
I think when we worked on fentanyl testing strip legislation in Mississippi last year, that same legislation had failed the year before. And the messaging behind that was, this is encouraging people to use drugs if they're able to test the drugs. This is kind of like saying that it's okay. And last year, when that same legislation came up again, there was also legislation to increase penalties for fentanyl possession and trafficking and things like that. So you had these a host of bills that had very different approaches to taking on this fentanyl problem. And what we saw happen last year is that the fentanyl testing strips bill passed unanimously, and the increased penalty bills failed. So this shift is happening even here in Mississippi, which is a, very conservative religious state, to shifting away from there's a drug problem, that must mean we need harsher penalties and longer sentences, to there's a drug problem. I wonder how we can keep people alive. I wonder how we can help them at least not die. Like that would be a good first step. And then how can we help open up more pathways to recovery for people, or how is it that we can be part of that? So to me, that was the actual bill win was great. But to me, seeing that shift in approach from our legislature was really, really encouraging. Just seeing that the mental shift that's happening, that's creating this legislative shift away from that the knee-jerk reaction is going to be, we're just going to add some more penalties on, to let's see if we can actually solve the problem and get a little bit closer to that. So that, I think, was one of the most gratifying changes, because to me it signals this culture change and policy change that's happening as a result of that culture and mind change, which I just absolutely love.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear how not only is the narrative changing, but the policies are starting to change around it as well. And I think it's incredible to see that stuff coming alive. I know I read briefly about the Molly Angel Project, and how they provide life-saving resources like naloxone, and advocating for fentanyl testing strips seems like an incredible organization, and one that you've done some work with.
Yep. Yeah, that story of Christy Barber, who started that, is in Curious. And I actually just saw that it was Molly's, the the organization is named after a girl named Molly. And her birthday would have been yesterday. She passed away from an overdose a number of years ago. But yeah, incredible to see people like Christy who are using the pain in their life. Molly was her son's girlfriend in high school, and her son is currently incarcerated. But using what has been so painful in their lives to bring about life-saving change and hope and help for other people, even though it's exposing them to more sorrow. Some of the people that Christy helps end up passing away, and yet for her, this is just this life calling of how can I help other people that are in a similar situation to what her son was in, and maybe help them find that pathway of healing by giving them a kind person who cares about their health and is trying to help them stay alive and get the help that they need.
Yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable when people take a very tough situation and turn it into helping others and kind of channeling that difficulty. And I certainly appreciate when that's possible. And the last question I've asked in other episodes, as including yours, maybe it's changed, maybe it hasn't, but if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Well, for me, it would be on this issue of drug policy. So I would snap my fingers, but I would need a lot of things to happen at the same time. Some policy change, some culture change, some social norms to change. And I think what we would see if we moved back to treating all substance use like we treat, alcohol and tobacco use, where we allow it to be legally accessible, but we also have laws that protect the broader community. We have age to purchase laws. We have sensible regulations. We have the ability for people to access something that's not contaminated, to make a personal choice, but not to just have free reign to go harm other people in the community or create, public disorder or anything like that. But also as part of that, create some of the social norms that have developed around something like smoking. So we do allow people to smoke tobacco if they want to. And yet smoking rates have dramatically decreased as it has fallen out of favor and out of cultural acceptance, as some people have chosen not to because of the health consequences. Some people have chosen not to because it's become harder and harder to find places to smoke. It's not what it was 50 years ago when it was just kind of the cool thing to do. And everybody did it, it seemed like. And so I think there is a part of this shift that we want to see happen, that you can't just create a healthier culture by policy change. We do need these social norms to be able to develop alongside the shift in how we allow other drugs to be used, so that we can kind of strike that middle ground between not criminalizing, but also it's not just a free for all, go do whatever you want, and everybody else has to kind of pay the consequences of your choices. So that would be my change. It would be a multifaceted snap of the fingers, Jeff.
Understood.
Lots of finger snapping at the same time, maybe.
I like it. I think it would work, and I like to think that we are on that path to normalizing drug addiction and recovery, and to decriminalizing. We're slowly but surely making changes in that direction, and not a huge part of that is the work that you and Edit for Good are doing. So in addition to getting your book and talking to people about it, how else can people support you and Edit for Good and your impact?
Yeah, people can always give online if they want to support. You can go to enditforgood.com. You can donate there, or you can reach out to us and have a broader discussion on what that could look like. Telling people about the work is the kind of number one thing that we want people to do, because whether it's giving them a copy of Curious, whether it's sharing the link to my TEDx talk, which is kind of the 20-minute version of Curious, whether it is joining us on social media and following and sharing posts from there, The way that change happens is by more people becoming aware that there's a different way to do this. We don't have to continue down this same failed approach and just hope that somehow doing more of the failed approach is going to bring about something that it hasn't brought about yet. We don't have to keep doing that. And there are other approaches, and there are ways to learn about them that are accessible to the general public. So Curious is not a policy manual. It is a memoir of my own learning journey and change. So for some people, that's just the perfect thing that they're going to need to engage on this issue. And for people who feel like, well, that's not really going to make change, what can one person really do? Every good thing that's happened in the world has happened because one person has talked to another person. They've started a little group. They've got together and they started working on it. And yeah, it does take time, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. Years ago, I wouldn't have been able to vote. And now we look back on that and we say, what in the world? How was there a society where women couldn't vote just because they were women? But that didn't just happen overnight. It happened because people said, hey, this shouldn't be this way. And I'm going to work to change that. And they went through a long, hard slog to change it. But as it changed, as the hearts and the minds of the people in the culture changed, eventually as those policies changed, now we have a world today where we can't imagine in America where women could not vote. And I think that's where we're going to get related to drugs and addiction. I think we're going to get in 10, 20, 30 years to a place where we look back on this time and say, maybe it's our children and grandchildren that are saying this, I can't believe that you really thought putting someone in jail was going to solve their addiction? Like, that's crazy. You even had the research that said trauma makes addiction worse, not better. And yet you continue down that path. We're going to get there. How fast will we get there? That's a function of how many people are willing to make it part of their world and part of the thing that they care about to move us on that path. We will get there as soon as enough people join the movement and share the movement and help the movement grow. That's how movements grow. That's how change happens.
Well, I'm excited to help you in pushing that change forward and to bring more people into the fold. And, thanks so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your work. Love the book, Curious. It's incredible, and excited to work more with End It for Good, and look forward to talking again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So great to be with you again.
Thanks for checking out this episode of People Are the Answer. For more information, go to peoplearetheanswer.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, whatever you can do on various platforms. We really appreciate the support. And if you're interested, check out my other podcast, The Late Game Podcast. You can learn more at thelategame.com. Thanks.